Sí.
Pégame un grito si...
The cat is trying to jump on the computer because she's hungry, so.
You have to feed her.
Yes, he went to feed her downstairs.
Always feed the cat before the micro seminar.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm gonna start introducing you.
Okay.
So today we're excited to host Melisa Olivelli. And Melisa works at the Consejo Nacional de Investigaciones Científicas y Técnicas CONICET. And since 2014, she's also a teaching professor in environmental microbiology at the Universidad de San Martín in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And her talk today is called Microbes, Organic Matter and Minerals, Influence on Carbon Sequestration and Emerging Contaminants in Wetlands. So I'm giving you the microphone, Melisa.
Okay, thank you, Leticia, and thank you all for attending to this seminar and the ISMEA for hosting this talk. And today I will be introducing you to the field of microbes and organic matter and minerals interaction and how these can be of importance in influence on carbon sequestration and how contaminants that can enter to environments as wetlands can affect this type of environments and interactions, and how this will be affecting, for example, the release of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And that's an issue that concerns us all, because we need to develop strategies for the climate change mitigation. I will try to be really clear in the ideas and on the presentation, and I apologize for my English in advance because it's not my native language, and I will try to do my best. So if there's something that I'm not expressing very clearly, you can ask me, and we can see what doubts or inquiries you have. So first of all, before getting into the presentation, I will tell you that our institute is located outside the center of Buenos Aires in a really nice area. It's a suburban area. We have a really big and nice campus. This is a map of the campus, and we have new buildings and facilities. And this one here is our institute. It's the Institute of Environmental and Engineering Research. And well, here you can see a photo from the sky, and we have green areas, and it's really, really nice to work in there. So our research group is focused in how we can develop tools for sustainable land use in the Delta del Paraná wetlands. I will talk about these kind of wetlands in a few slides later. And I will tell you also that we have a 10-year project for the sustainable development of strategies for land management in wetlands, funded by Wetlands International. And particularly this work focused in understanding the complex biogeochemistry dynamics and in soil carbon from this kind of wetlands, and how the contaminants inputs can affect this kind of soil carbon cycle in this kind of changing environments. The wetlands particularly are really changing environments in terms of oxygen and redox conditions. And I will try to talk about these subjects a little bit further in the next slides. So what is a wetland? A wetland is an environment, an ecosystem that is normally covered by water. Many of the time, the soil is covered by water, and normally you have flooding seasons and you have dry seasons, and that's why the hydrological regime is very dynamic. And with that kind of changes, of course, all properties change. The microorganisms, the minerals, also the vegetation can change. And when you have the flooding seasons, the vegetation, the aerial part of the plants are covered by water, and normally, of course, there are all of that kind of vegetation is adapted to that kind of environment. So why it's important to study and preserve these kind of environments? This is a map where you can see a bigger detail here of the blue corridor. It's the place of study that we are studying together with Wetlands International. It's a system of rivers, and a riverine system where you can see that it goes through Brazil, going through Bolivia and Paraguay and Argentina, and finishing in a kind of delta in Buenos Aires. So this is a really important environment and ecosystem because it's a really big freshwater source, and it's an environment, and all that basin controls the flooding seasons from the near the river zones to inland zones. And it's really important for the agriculture production because of the water, and from the local people that lives there, they can get some economic profit from fishing and from agriculture and stuff. But the other important things for preserving wetlands all around the globe is the carbon storage processes. The soil from wetlands can store a lot of carbon in the form of organic matter, and this is really, really important for climate change mitigation. So, as wetlands normally don't have the conditions for agriculture, the livestock frontier is expanding to this type of environments, causing a huge impact in the environment from diverse point of views. As examples, farmers drain the lands, and there's a huge amount of organic matter input from the manure from the cows, and the animals get together in small pieces of fields, for example, when the flooding season comes, and causing a similar impact as the feedlots, where you have a lot of animals in animal farms for cattle raising in small farms. So this has a lot of impact around the globe, because Argentina is not the only country that is facing these type of problems. So the other big problem that we have is that the manure that goes into the soil contains residues of veterinary drugs like antibiotics and, for example, antiparasitic drugs, and the animals change the hydrological regime, doing channels while they walk around the field. So the field is changing, the ecosystem changes, and the activity from human are changing the landscape. And of course, with the changes of the landscape, we have a lot of other changes that maybe they are not so evident from the naked eye, but we have a lot of transformations in soils. And an important thing is that we have to address, for example, the fate of pollutants that will depend on the environmental conditions. So we will have abiotic transformations due to soil properties and minerals. We will have redox condition that changes over time because of the flooding season or the raining. And you have changes because of the soil constituents properties, of course, the human activities that I mentioned before, and you will have different kind of microorganism assemblage depending on the redox conditions and of course of the climate. So to address the fate of pollutants and how the carbon turnover is happening in this kind of wetlands, you have to face the problem from a microbiology and a geobiochemistry point of view, not only as a field kind of point of view. So what are the impacts that we see on carbon storage? What are the impacts that we might see on carbon storage? Well, we all have studied the carbon cycle from kindergarten to high school, and our main characters here are the decomposers and the carbon dioxide fixers and the organic matter as well. But what nobody told us is the importance of the soil organic carbon in climate change mitigation. So we will be talking about how important it is to maintain this carbon storage inside the soil to prevent the carbon dioxide to go to the atmosphere. Because a small part of soil organic matter that mineralizes could cause the release of great concentrations of this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, causing global scale impacts. So the role of organic carbon in soils as long-term deposits can be studied as an important subject for the climate change mitigation, and particularly wetlands are very important carbon sinks around the globe, not just because they have organic matter inputs because of the hydrological regime, but also because of the microorganisms that lives there in anaerobic conditions that slows down the mineralization of carbon in some cases. So the factors that we were mentioning as climate, soil, mineralogy, anthropogenic activities, ecosystem types, and pollutants will affect not only the pollutants' fate, but also it will change the dynamic changes in carbon storage, particularly the anthropogenic activities and the ecosystem types together with the inputs of these pollutants is our aim of the research, because there are no studies that address altogether the input of pollutants and the carbon storage and the changes in the hydrological regime of this type of environments. So we will be, for understanding what is happening in the soil organic carbon from stable aggregates into the soil that can be released into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, we have to address the interactions between minerals, organic matter, and microorganisms. So it is really important that we first talk about the type of minerals that we can find in this type of environments. We will have two types of minerals. We will have the metal oxides and we will have clays. We will have, for example, iron oxides or manganese oxides, and we will have, for example, smectite clays. Organic matter, as you can see here, will be interacting with the surfaces of these two types of minerals. They have huge differences in the type of interaction they can, with the type of interaction they can attach, because, for example, clay minerals, they don't have a reactive surface. They have charges, they will have a net charge that will attract chemical compounds or microorganisms, but they cannot react exactly as a chemical reaction or as a chemical modification in the structure with the organic matter. So the mineral attached organic matter will be different if they are attached to a clay, or if they are attached to an iron or manganese oxide. In both cases, mineral plays the important role of protecting organic matter, but they will have different roles in that kind of protection depending on the redox condition of the environment. And that's one of the issues that we will be covering in this talk. So for example, if we have a clay and we have organic matter attached to that clay, it can be released, and these dissolved organic matter and nutrients can be attacked by microorganisms. On the other hand, when we have, for example, a reactive surface as iron or manganese oxides, the organic matter can attach to it and it can suffer transformation, or it can suffer, for example, reduction or oxidation processes. And the microorganisms will be here waiting for some of the organic matter to be released so they can eat. And of course, we have another type of microorganisms, the anaerobic microorganisms, that can reduce the iron oxides from iron 3 to iron 2. And this kind of solubilization causes the release of organic matter as well. Sorry. So what happens, or what is the role in the soil organic matter in all of this? So the organic matter is crucial for the soil aggregation. So the quality of this organic matter will be directly related to the kind of particles that we might have. And the kind of particles will be directly related to the amount of oxygen, to the amount of nutrients that microorganisms can access. So these kind of processes involved in the formation of this mineral attached organic matter is one of the keys for understanding soil carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. Of course, this mineral attached organic matter and soil organic matter, or soluble organic matter, both can contribute actively in the sequestration of contaminants. So what do microorganisms do to all of these particles? Well, as I mentioned before, the layer silicate clays, the clays, normally they don't have a reactive surface, so the microorganisms will attach to this kind of clays and play an important role in attachment and detachment and the formation of biofilms, and they are critical for colonization of new environments for microorganisms, and they will be related directly with the ecology of microbial populations, but they cannot suffer chemical reactions from microorganisms. On the contrary, for the metal oxides and hydroxides, for example, the microbial most important redox processes is due to this kind of metal oxides, because if they don't have these, for example, iron oxides, they won't have an electron acceptor for eating in anaerobic conditions. So these have a huge impact on soil physical, chemical, and biological processes, because this will influence, for example, the enzyme activity and the metabolism of these kind of microorganisms. And of course, this will play a role in the mineral formation in terms of the synthesis of humic, for example, substances. So before discussing what happens with the carbon in this type of environments, we already talked about minerals. We talked about the organic matter that can be attached to minerals. And we talked about the kind of reactions that microorganisms can do to these particles. But I would like to introduce the kind of interaction we might find between microbes, minerals, and organic matter and pollutants in the soil. So Once the pollutants and the organic matter enters the soil, they can be interacting with the different biogeochemical interfaces. They are not swimming around freely. So these interactions are specifically important for the soil rhizosphere and, for example, in water sediment interface. And we will have a lot of nutrients release, we will have microbial turnover, and of course, we will have running around all the pollutants that might enter to this kind of interfaces or compartments in the environment. So here we have like an example of what would happen if a contaminant, an organic contaminant as a veterinary drug, for example, enters the environment. We have a layer silicate clay here, we will have organic matter, and we will have, for example, the heterotrophs, decomposers trying to eat this organic matter molecule, and the organic contaminant will be here. And on the other hand, we will have the decomposers, for example, in anaerobic conditions, trying to attack these oxides to obtain electron acceptors, and they will be trying to eat this organic matter to obtain energy. And all these reactions will take place all together. So we cannot get rid of the decomposer. We don't want to get rid of the decomposers, of course, because if not, we wouldn't have the organic matter turnover, and we wouldn't have the recycling of nutrients for plants and for all of the biodiversity. But if the organic matter attached to clays and the organic matter acts as a glue for contaminants, once the decomposers attack that organic matter, they can be releasing the organic contaminant as well. And this could cause a different fate of the contaminant. This could cause the potential release and transport of the pollutants. So the contaminants can as well attach directly to the organic matter and can as well attach to the mineral phase. And of course, we found some reports where the organic contaminants can affect the microbial communities there, and this can affect the organic matter turnover. So our research is motivated by the contamination of soils with this kind of emergent organic contaminants, and how we could apply our knowledge to prevent mineralization of soil organic carbon. If we understand the factors that affect the viability of contaminants and how they are spread to the other environments and how they affect carbon cycling, we could perform regulatory decisions for sustainable management of this type of protected areas. So how anthropogenic activities in this kind of wetlands affect then carbon cycling? The land use plus the contaminants that might enter to that kind of environment will affect or might affect the carbon turnover in this type of soils. And that's the issue that we want to address with this type of research. So there are almost no reports on how all the variables that we were discussing affect the soil organic matter quality or vulnerability for mineralization or the microbial communities assemblage. Soils dominated by iron or manganese or aluminum oxides and hydroxides play an important role in soil organic matter stabilization, but particularly deltas will receive a lot of sedimentary material from the upstream of the basin, and they deposit on the top of the soil during the flooding seasons. This will result in a first horizon with finely textured clays that limit oxygen diffusion. So the result is that we will have a mixture of processes in alluvial floodplain soils where we will have metal oxides, we will have clays, we will have a lot of organic matter inputs and a changing hydrological regime that will cause dynamic soil chemistry and microbiology. And of course, we don't have to forget the veterinary drugs. So this environment will be changing from fully oxygenated to anaerobic conditions during the flooding seasons and the dry seasons. So there is emerging evidence that suggests that mineral-mediated acceleration of organic matter through these kind of iron and manganese oxides will serve as electron donors in anaerobic microsites, will cause the organic matter decay in soils. But this kind of process will fight with the equilibrium that the organic matter will be protected in the anaerobic microsites by other type of minerals as clays, for example. So how we will study the organic soil carbon turnover and the contaminants fate in the environment? Well, first, I will talk to you about the laboratory approach. Unfortunately, this year, as you all know, because of the COVID pandemic, we are delayed in our lab research. So I will show you how we will approach these experiments and how we will approach this research. But unfortunately, we don't have any results yet. So we have several hypotheses. First of all, the release of dioxide, carbon, and drugs and other metabolic products will be the result of a dynamic equilibrium between both types of microorganisms, aerobic and anaerobic, and minerals in redox changing conditions. Second, the microbial communities could be affected due to veterinary drugs. And last, the organic matter destabilization will contribute to veterinary drugs to be released and transported to water. So we will perform the study in mesocosms with samples from the soils from wetlands, and we will simulate oxic conditions and anoxic conditions in the presence of some veterinary drugs, as for example, the ivermectin, that is an antiparasitic drug, a wide spectrum antiparasitic drug. And we will study how iron oxides attached to organic matter can be protected in oxic environments and how organic matter attached to clays can be mineralized in oxic environments through aerobic heterotrophic bacteria. And in anoxic environments, we will be addressing how the iron-3 reduction can be releasing, for example, the organic matter and the veterinary drugs, and how clays will protect this kind of organic matter. So we will be studying the organic matter turnover. We will be studying how the drugs will stabilize in this kind of mesocosms, and the organic matter complexes that get synthesized in the solids. So we will be addressing as well the microbial community changes in soil organic carbon stocks, and changes, of course, in the mineralogy and the organic matter molecular structure. So we also will be addressing a sampling scheme in the field to have a field approach in situ. So during the dry season, we are working in the field that the cows and the cattle, the livestock, they are injected with this drug, the ivermectin drug. And then, of course, they have the manure input into the soil of this environment. And in oxic conditions, the manure containing veterinary drugs enters the soil and it will be incorporated to soil organic matter and will be mineralized in the short term. But in the long term, the manure will contribute to the formation of stable of mineral organic matter, aggregates, and to the synthesis of humic and fulvic acids. So, of course, these are hypotheses, and we will have to study what's happening through the characterization of all of these samples in the different seasons. But we are basing these kind of studies in a lot of reports of these kind of processes. So during the flooding season, the anoxic conditions will be destabilizing the organic soil, the soil organic matter associated to these iron and manganese oxides. And due to microbial anaerobic activity, this will be mineralized and the organic carbon will be released to the atmosphere. But in the case of clays, organic matter will be stabilized, on the contrary. And there are no reports that drugs can affect these kind of processes in redox changing conditions. So we will be addressing the community, the microbial communities change, and how the carbon storage is affected and how the cycling of the drug is affected, in terms of the fate of the pollutant. After the flooding, the contaminant and the products of the mineralization, together with the drugs that were potentially released, goes into the environment. And this leads to toxicological effects, because there are reports that this drug has been found downstream and it has been found inside the invertebrates, inside vegetation, in sediments. So they are not just local drugs, they are spreading widely and they can affect the ecosystems in a bigger scale. So we will characterize the microbial community assemblage, of course, the minerals, the nitrogen and phosphorus content, of course, and the organic matter being released, and the drug content and the organic matter molecular structure, to see how the contaminants are affecting the organic carbon turnover. So the physical and chemical and biological interactions between these surfaces from microbes and minerals are revealing a dynamic and continuing carbon transformations, losses, and protection. So this will contribute to understanding the role of these pollutants and these contaminants in soil organic dynamics in this kind of environments that has a really changing condition regarding to water. And it's really important because we are trying to protect the sustainable management of wetlands. And this is the first time that we are performing an evaluation that it's really interdisciplinary, and it will has to do with the climate change mitigation. And it's really important for regulatory decision making. So, well, thank you all for your attention, and I hope that you enjoy this brief talk. And well, I'm open for questions, and I don't know if Letitia's there.
Yes, I'm still here. That was a really nice talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess you're a good teacher.
I hope so.
So I have a few questions to start off. My first question is actually, you mentioned a lot of these veterinary products. And I
Yes.
was wondering, what are these, like the most commonly used veterinary products that really affect those biological processes?
You have the regular antibiotics, for example, the tetracyclines, and the ivermectin is a really new drug. I mean, it's not new, but it's being applied like in huge amounts. And the problem is that all these drugs, they have only a small part of these drugs are metabolized inside the livestock. So all the drugs goes into the manure and directly to the soil. And for example, there's a huge problem because sometimes farmers try to develop a more sustainable agriculture and they use manure to fertilize the crops. And this is a huge problem because they are entering a lot of veterinary drugs into the soil. And that's another issue that has to be taken into account when we talk, for example, of organic kind of crops or organic foods that you can buy in the store. I mean, you are not applying directly pesticides, but if you are fertilizing with manure, you have to take into account that you might find a lot of these kind of drugs.
And do you have any data on how prevalent that antibiotic resistance is in soils?
Yes, there are a lot of data about antibiotic resistance. And for example, I found a really new research about how antibiotics increase the respiration of microorganisms in aerobic conditions. So because these kind of microorganisms, they are resistant to the antibiotics, and they somehow they increase their respiration. So is the contrary that we are trying to perform. I mean, the soil organic carbon sequestration and stabilization. So the organic carbon is being released to the atmosphere, and it's a really important issue that is really not being taken into account since the last years. It's a really new stuff. So yes, but it's not, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but the problem with these kind of processes is that it's not a generic result. I mean, if you find that some drug increases respiration, you cannot extrapolate that result to other kind of fields or other kind of drugs, because it will, as you might see during the talk, this has to deal with a lot of aspects in the biogeochemistry, because you have microorganisms that will attack organic matter in aerobic conditions, and you have anaerobic microorganisms attacking organic matter in anaerobic conditions, and it will depend on the mineralogy of that soil. The type of soil we have in this kind of wetlands, it's a mix of iron oxides and clays because of the type of basin we have. So we assume that we will have like an equilibrium between the release of organic matter and protection of organic matter due to both types of minerals in the flooding season and in the dry season. But that might be affected by these veterinary drugs. So that's what we want to study.
Did I understand it right that the cattle farming actually increases the proportion of anoxic habitat in the soil?
Yes, because the livestock, I don't know, they walked and they compact the soil, and then the water goes into the soil, and the anaerobic conditions persist longer than they used to if you don't have any livestock there.
Yeah. But I was just thinking, if you know that antibiotic resistance is pretty widespread in the soils, then you could assume that many of the important players for like the biogeochemical processes, that they're actually resistant and they're carrying out their roles.
Yes, we don't know yet, but I mean, it's not my field of expertise, the antibiotic resistance, but I think it will be really interesting to add someone to the research team that can contribute in that kind of field, because I think it's really interesting to evaluate the antibiotic resistant genes and stuff. Yes.
Exactly. I was just thinking you could have an experiment with a positive control where you actually
Yes.
something that you can culture and you make it resistant to antibiotics, and then you measure its performance compared to the others.
Yes,
Something like that.
we can try mesocosm with that kind of strains as well. Yes, we will have to think about it, but it's a really interesting idea.
And I was also wondering that in the long term, if you're assuming that people still want to eat beef in Argentina, what type of farming practice would you suggest to keep the soils the healthiest?
Actually, we have this problem here in the wetlands, but so I think unsustainable. But we have to take care of a lot of things if we want to perform cattle raising in a sustainable way, to minimize the impacts, to minimize the carbon emissions, and to minimize the impacts in the soil. I think that there is a lot to be made still, and we have to address these issues as soon as possible to mitigate climate change and to mitigate the effects on soils. But particularly this place, because of the climate and the hydrological regime, I think has the worst impacts, because it's affecting directly to a huge resource of fresh water. And that's different than what might happen in the center of the country, where you don't have maybe a river basin near the cattle raising farms.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there are no more questions now.
Okay, great.
Let me thank you one more time. That was really interesting to host you.
Okay, thank you all, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk. And well,
yes, of course.
If you have any more questions or inquiries or suggestions, you can write to me to my personal email. I don't have any problem with that, so you can contact me.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Leticia.
You're welcome.